Now, this morning, really all I want to do is to give you an overview of the assignment. So I don't know if you've noticed or not, on Moodle, there is an assignment section here. And I've published the specification for the first assignment. So I'm just going to talk through that. I've given you fairly good indications as to the overall kind of target of this assignment back along, so shouldn't be any surprises there, I hope. And I have mentioned to you a number of occasions that there is a strong link between this assignment and your first assignment for the web app module. So on my side, on this module, really what you're going to be doing at a very high level is essentially developing a CI pipeline for your React app, for your Movies app, and for the Movies app that you will be submitting for assignment 1 on that module. I'm calling it a build process here, but that's essentially the CI part of CI/CD. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about this little bit here. These assignment specifications, we need to make these available to what we refer to as our external examiners. These are people that assess the quality of the assignments that we set for students, be it exams or CA assignments. So this bit that I've highlighted here is more targeted at them rather than ye, because I'm just saying here that the students study a module called Web App Dev, in which and in that module, as you know, you develop in the labs anyway, you develop a React app, and I refer to that app as a baseline React app because I use that term further down in this assignment specification. Now, I know that the submission date for the web app assignment is, I think, the 19th of November, I was told. So I'm setting the deadline for this assignment to be just a couple of days after that because of the links between the two assignments. And this is worth 40%. So it's 20% for the labs, 40% for this assignment, and 40% for the second assignment that I give you around week 12, really, 11 or 12. And you'll be working on the second assignment over Christmas, unfortunately, and submitting it in early January. I say unfortunately, but the whole point is that I want to give you time to work on these assignments. I could try and cram both assignments into the first, into the 14-week period, but that wouldn't give you really enough time, I think, to absorb all of this stuff and produce something tangible for ye and for me. Moving on. Okay, what this assignment is going to be targeting in terms of what we've learned is you're going to be using Cypress, going to be using GitLab CI, Git, of course. Webpack is something that is being used in the Create React App tool that you are using for the web app dev. And sorry, I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, but maybe a bit too big. So for now, don't worry about the Webpack stuff because there is a topic I need to cover with you after the midterm break. And that's where this stuff will become relevant. In terms of deliverables, again, fairly obvious stuff. You will be submitting a Git, a project that contains a Git repository. You'll be submitting a GitHub URL. I'll also need to see the video that you are going to make for Roseanne. I haven't asked Roseanne, actually. I haven't checked with her, but I presume she's asked you to make a short video demonstration of your React app. I will need to see that video as well so that I get a sense of what you have developed what features you have developed on top of the baseline React app that you rolled out in her labs, because obviously that will dictate the kind of testing that you need to do for this assignment, end-to-end testing. So I wouldn't worry about this stuff for now. Other than to say that in the GitHub repo that you will have for my assignment, I will prescribe the README that you need to complete for this assignment. And it's very important that you complete that README in accordance with the template that I give you, because I use the README when I'm assessing your work. And by now, you know that I have a big hang up about Git and Git history and commit messages. So it's goes without saying that you must have a Git history associated with the work that you submit to me. And the Git commit messages should be informative. Always when you're doing, when you're committing, you should always kind of ask yourself this question: well, what was I trying to achieve in the work that I've been doing for the last whatever hour, 3/4 an hour, or 2 hours, and you're about to commit that work? What was I trying to achieve? Maybe you were trying to fix a particular bug, so be specific, you know, trying to, and maybe you haven't fixed it yet, and that's okay, but commit the work anyway. I'm saying here actually that you should commit every time you sit down to do some work on this assignment, whether you've completed what you were trying to achieve or not. You should do a commit at the end of every work session. Thereabouts anyway. So you should have a significant number of commits. And every time you sit down to do some work on this assignment, presumably you're trying to achieve something, whether it be, you know, fix a problem, develop a new test, add something to your CI pipeline. Whatever it is you're trying to achieve, then the commit message should express that, whether you have actually finished it or not. Now, I know I would have said to you when I talked about Git that you should never commit incomplete work. Well, we're breaking that rule, and that's fine. This is not a work environment. So how am I going to assess what you are going to submit? And the objective, again, of the overall project is to complete a build process or develop a build process for your React app. And I'm providing a grading spectrum, and I kind of, the objective of this grading spectrum is to hopefully make it clear to you what I'm looking for. And the grading spectrum is broken up into 3 different grades. I have a good grade, I have an excellent grade, and I've got an outstanding grade. So it really depends on what you're aiming for in terms of a mark. I'm sure everybody's trying to get the best mark they can, but so let's see what's required in order to get into the good grade, which is between 40 and 60%. And because of the link between this assignment now and the React app, if the nature of the React assignment that you're doing, if the additional features that you have added to the baseline React app if the additional features are very similar to the features that you would have developed in the baseline React app. The baseline now is what I'm referring to as the version of the Movies app that you would have at the end of the labs in the web app dev module. So that's your baseline. You're adding new features to it. If the nature of those features are very similar to the features that were already in the baseline, then I guess you could argue that the testing that you're going to have to do, the end-to-end testing that you're going to have to do, will be quite similar to the end-to-end testing that we developed in our Cypress lab. So there'll be a certain amount of cutting and pasting and maybe making slight changes to the new testing code that you're going to develop. But either way, from an automated testing point of view, clearly you're going to have functional testing and navigation testing. You're going to be testing the new features that you have developed, And I'm also saying that there are some features in the baseline app that we didn't develop tests for in our Cypress lab. In particular, I'm thinking of the movie reviews part of the baseline React app. We didn't go near that really. So you will have to develop tests for that part of the React app, as well as whatever new features that you have developed. Here, still on the testing side, just make sure that the kind of text string that you pass to the it blocks and the describe blocks, make sure that they are very clear, so that it's obvious what each test case is trying to achieve in terms of proving that something works or doesn't work. I wouldn't worry too much about this, but the only point I'm trying to make on this adherence to testing standards is don't have lots of console.logs either in your React code or in your testing code. We all put in console.logs when we're trying to debug stuff, but make sure that they are disabled or removed from your React code and your testing code so that they don't pop up when we're running our tests. That's this kind of silent principle, if you remember, that I mentioned way back. In terms of continuous integration, to be honest, a lot of what I'm looking for in the continuous integration, you will already have set up in the GitLab lab from this week. So, and that's why, you know, I forced you to completing that GitLab, even though we had some issues, obviously. But hopefully by the end of this week, everybody will have completed the GitLab lab. And essentially that is the starting point for this assignment. I have a little bit at the end of this page explaining what the starting point is for this assignment. But in brief, in summary, that's what it is. The result of this week's GitLab lab will be your starting point. So you have your YAML file already, and it has a pipeline defined, and it's hopefully all working. Well, that's almost sufficient for this particular grade to make sure it's still working when you've added on your own tests. Right, from a source control point of view, I've already mentioned there has to be a very good log history. The log history should show to me that you've been working on this assignment over a sustained period of time. You know, you're getting the specification now, you'll be submitting it. You'll be submitting your assignment on the 22nd of November. What I would hope is to see from the Git log is that you've been working on it a little bit every week between now and then, that it's not just a mad rush of work at the very end. That's what I mean by sustained work effort. Informative commit messages, I've already spoken about those. You should be using the branch edit merge workflow throughout. So there should be lots of branches in your local Git repository, not just the core branches. By the way, when you push to, whether it be pushing to GitLab or to GitHub, you're always pushing a particular branch, and typically it's, you know, you're doing a git push to the master branch, or maybe a git push to the develop branch. All of the other branches that you create, we never push those to GitHub or GitLab. We can if we want to, but we don't. So what I'm trying to get at there is that there will be a lot more branches in your local Git repository than there will be branches up on GitHub or GitLab. That's just by the way. You don't have to do anything to change that. So that's what I'm calling the what do I call it? The good grade band. To get into the excellent grade band, from the React app perspective, it's more likely now that you have developed some new features that are quite different from any of the features that existed in the baseline app. And in order to do that, you would have to develop your own components. And therefore, if you've got features that are quite different from anything that was in the baseline app, then that means that the tests that you're going to have to write, the end-to-end Cypress test that you're going to have to write, will require a little bit more effort on your part, because you won't be able to easily reuse any of the tests that we developed in our Cypress lab. But in terms of what I'm looking for, again, it's just functionality testing. There may be opportunities for error and exception test cases. Remember this idea of your normal test cases, your boundary test cases, and your error test cases. Well, you may see opportunities to write test cases that deal with error scenarios or exceptional scenarios. They may not be that many, but one or two would be great. I'd be looking to see that you are nesting your, you know the way we can nest describe blocks inside describe blocks. And that really is what allows us to structure our tests in meaningful ways. So rather than having a big, long list of it blocks inside one describe block, try to group the it blocks into meaningful groups. And we do that by using nested describe blocks. So if you can see opportunities to do that, then you should avail of it. And again, I'd only be looking for one or two examples of good structuring of your test code. Now, this is something that we didn't cover purposefully. And if I just explain it, there's a hyperlink here describing this, taking you to the section in the Cypress documentation that talks about custom commands. So if I just flip over to VS Code. And I'm just going to bring up, let's say, the filtering test. So in the language of Cypress, we would say, just give me 1 second now, sorry. Yeah, in the language of Cypress, we would say that each of these things here are commands. You know, get is a command that's provided by Cypress. Let's see. Wrap is another command. This is just the language of Cypress. But these are all commands that are built into the Cypress framework itself. I seem to be using get an awful lot. It's the most common one, I suppose. I'm just looking for some other options. Contains is another command, whereas should there is an assertion. Where did I see should? Should is an assertion. But so there's a whole set of built-in commands provided by the Cypress framework. It turns out that you can actually create your own commands, which we refer to as custom commands. Now, when and why would you need to do that? Well, supposing, and don't worry about the specifics now, but supposing this group of, this set of, this sequence of statements occurred a number of times either within this test file or across a number of test files. So whatever this set of statements are doing, we need to repeat those a number of times in our testing code. And we never like repeating code, whether it be our source code or our test code. Wherever we find ourselves repeating the same sequence of statements, we prefer to get rid of that. This is this dry principle. Now in Cypress, what you can do is you can actually take this sequence of commands, let's say it's this one here, you can take them and you can wrap them inside a single command, where the single command is what you define. That you can give whatever a meaningful name to that command. Presumably the name would reflect what the purpose of this 3 lines are. And then you can use that custom command. You can essentially replace what I've highlighted here with a single line of code. The single line of code will again begin with cy dot, but what appears after the dot will be the name of this custom command that you have defined. And when we look inside the body of that custom command, it will essentially contain the code that I've highlighted here. So the purpose of custom commands is to eliminate repeating sequences of statements in your Cypress code, and thus make your test code more readable, and I suppose volume-wise, less lines of code. Now, I would only be looking for, maybe 2 examples of using custom commands. And even if you don't have to repeat the code, you can still just demonstrate that you have implemented some custom commands to, let's say, and you've been able to use those custom commands within your code. So what I'm saying is, okay, I've highlighted these 3 lines here. Let's supposing these 3 lines aren't actually repeated anywhere else, but I'm still going to create a custom command for these 3 lines, just to demonstrate that I understand how to implement custom commands. So that's what I'm getting at here. So you first of all have to go to this hyperlink in the docs, and it explains how you create custom commands, where you put them, and how you use them in your test specs. So a little bit of research required on your behalf in order to achieve that. On the continuous integration point of view, I'm saying that you have to follow a particular branching policy, which I've detailed further down the line in this page. But the branching policy is very similar, in fact, if not identical, to the branching policy that I got you to follow in the GitLab lab. So again, you have some understanding and some experience of applying a branching policy to your continuous integration pipeline. But I have some more detail on this further down the page. For now, you can ignore this bundling and code splitting. That's a topic I have yet to cover with you, and it will probably be the first topic that I cover when we come back after the midterm break. It's something that you can achieve. You don't have to know about it right now. I mean, immediately you can start working on this assignment, because you'll have lots of end-to-end tests that you will need to write for whatever amount of development you have, new features you have developed for your movies app. So you don't need to know about this at all for now, and it's something that you can add on to your project later on in the semester when I brief you on it. In terms of source code control, there's something called pull requests. This is a topic also that I haven't covered with you yet, and we will get some experience of this notion of pull requests in the first lab that we do when we come back after the midterm break. So for now, you can ignore both of these issues here. To get into the outstanding grade, what I've decided to do is to give you 2 options. And, I don't think you need to worry at all about the outstanding grade for the moment. Obviously, you should concentrate on making sure that, first of all, you can satisfy every requirement of the good category. Then once you've done that, then start moving on to this grade band and see, can you achieve what's required inside here? You can certainly even start looking up on this stuff straight away if you wanted to. As I said, you can't really address the bundling, can't address these yet until we come back after the midterm, but you've got plenty to keep you going in the meantime. But to go back to the outstanding grade band, so there's two options I'm giving you. You just decide on one of them. One is to focus in on the continuous integration side of the assignment. Now, in the lecture, I've talked about CI/CD, where the CD part is about deploying your application to some cloud environment. And we haven't dealt with that at all in the GitLab lab this week. But what you would need to do is to see if you could work out how to deploy your React app to a cloud platform and make that part of your CI/CD pipeline. So you'd be adding a new job onto your pipeline, and the purpose of that job, the job would only run after the end-to-end tests job has run, and assuming that the end-to-end tests were all successful, this new job would then take your React app and deploy it to a cloud platform. Now, I have a link here that takes you to a page in the Cypress docs, and it talks about deployment. Now, unfortunately, this is only talking about how to deploy something manually yourself. It doesn't give you a whole lot of insight into how to add a job to your YAML file that achieves the auto deployment. So you may need to do some further reading up on it. But if I scroll down, so I'm talking about deploying your React app to a cloud platform. Now, there are lots of cloud platforms out there, but I am kind of advising, if you keep scrolling down, in fact, I'll just do a Google search. Sorry, not a Google search, but a page search. Yeah, this one here, Netlify. So Netlify is a cloud service that will allow you to deploy a React app to that service and thus make it accessible to lots of potential customers, I guess. So this section explains how to deploy a React app manually. By manually, I mean from the command line. You know, it looks like you have to install the Netlify CLI, and then you just run the Netlify CLI. So you can read on that, read up on this yourself, and you could deploy your Movies app. I think you just go in, create an account on Netlify, then you create a project within your account, and then you link that project, that Netlify project, to your Movies app, which you're kind of doing here, and you deploy your React app to that project on Netlify, and Netlify will generate a URL for your React app, and then you can access your React app up in Netlify using that URL. That's the essential, that's basically the idea. So once you've deployed it manually, then you look at, well, how can I get GitLab to do the deployment for me? Every time I make a change to my React code or to my tests and I push it to GitLab, that will trigger my pipeline. My pipeline will go through a build, an install, build, test. And if everything was successful, it will deploy the updated React app to your Netlify project. So that's the idea. And obviously, you know, you will need to, I guess you could even Google Netlify React auto deployment, and maybe Netlify React GitLab, and see if you can get some good online article that explains it to you. I'd be fairly confident they're out there. I haven't done it myself, but I'm sure there are probably a few. So you can either try and achieve that, or you can focus in on the automated testing side of this assignment. Now, it turns out that Cypress has a lot of support for testing React components. And again, I'm giving you a link to the Cypress docs. It talks about writing tests for React components. You see, the Cypress tests that we have been writing, they're completely independent of React. They don't know anything about React. Really, all they're concerned with, as I've told you, is the Cypress code that we're writing is interacting with the DOM in the browser. But it turns out that you can actually use Cypress to write automated tests for your individual components, which is essentially unit testing in the context of a React app. We're using Cypress in the context of end-to-end testing, but it seems that Cypress also supports unit testing, not only in relation to React, but in relation to Vue, which is an alternative to React, and a framework called Svelte, which is another alternative to React. But we're just interested in the React side of Cypress's support. So you'd have to read up on this section here of the Cypress docs to see if you can get to implement some component tests. And again, you need only implement it for a couple of components, not all of them, obviously. So let's say 2 or 3 of your existing React components. If you could write some unit tests using Cypress for those, then that would be sufficient. But as I said, you probably shouldn't even think about looking at this stuff until you've got a certain amount of the basic requirements for the earlier grade bands already achieved before you start looking at this stuff. So they're the grade bands. Again, come back to me if you need some clarification on any of the things that I've talked about. In terms of the branching policy that I need you to follow, essentially, it's the policy that you have been using in the GitLab lab, which is that your Git repository should have a main branch. The main branch should never have any direct commits on it. You should only ever be merging into the main branch. You should have a develop branch, which you already have from the GitLab lab. And all we ever did with the develop branches that we merged the develop branch into the main branch, if you remember, if you've completed the lab. So as well as these two, what I'm calling core branches, you're going to have what's often referred to as feature branches as well. I'll just scroll down a little bit here. Where do I mention them? Sorry, no, I thought I had mentioned them there somewhere. Oh yeah, here, feature branches. So feature branches are branches that should branch off of your develop branch, or they should emanate from the develop branch. And if you think about it, that's really what you were doing in the GitLab lab this week. You created these two core branches, and then anytime you wanted to do some work, the work in the case of that lab was to create some tests, but it could also be to develop source code, but I'm only interested in the testing side. Every time you wanted to write some new test, you created a new branch, which I'm referring to here as a feature branch. That branch was a branch off of the develop branch. And when you had completed the work, then you merged your feature branch into your develop branch, and then you pushed the develop branch up to GitLab. And if the pipeline worked successfully, you could also then merge the develop branch into the main branch, and that also triggered your CI pipeline. So that's kind of the workflow. and that's the branching policy that I want you to adhere to for this assignment. In terms of the CI pipeline and its association with the branches, I'm saying every time you update your develop branch, which really means every time you do a git push of the develop branch up to GitLab, then that should only trigger certain jobs in your pipeline. And I'm saying it should only trigger the install and build jobs. So the tests should not be executed when you update the develop branch. I have just arbitrarily decided that's the policy I want you to follow. Whereas when you update the main branch, i.e. do a git push to the main branch up in GitLab, that should trigger the install, the build, and the test jobs to execute. And at the risk of repeating myself too many times, this is slightly, I think you're going to have to make some slight changes to the YAML file to adhere to the CI pipeline branching policy. This stuff up here was really what you were doing in the GitLab lab already. So you should be familiar with the workflow. So what's my starting point? Your starting point is the what you submitted for the, or will submit for the GitLab lab. That is your starting point. You already have your Cypress set up, and you already have your GitLab YAML file working. And now because of the problems that we had in the GitLab lab this week, there are essentially two groups of you now. There are those people that took the movies folder and made a copy of that and created a Git repository inside it, or, and all of that stuff, the instructions that I gave you. So those people, that's what you should use. You should use that movies folder as your starting point. For the people that managed to get the GitLab stuff working using the original folder structure that you were using for Roseanne in the other module, well, that will be your starting point. But for those people, you should make a copy of that folder and use that copy for this assignment. So everybody now is going to have two folders, one that you will be using for the web app assignment, and another one which you will be using for my assignment. Now, it's unfortunate, but that means that whenever you're doing any development work on the web app assignment, and all of that will be inside in the SRC folder, then you will periodically, as I'm saying down here, you will periodically, where do I see it down here? Yeah, you periodically need to copy the SRC folder from your web app assignment over to the folder for my assignment, just so that your React code is as up to date as it should be for my assignment. Everybody needs to do this, right? You need to, now see for my assignment, if you take what you submitted for this week's lab, that project has a remote repository linked to GitLab, but it does not have a remote repository linked to GitHub. So you will need to create a new GitHub repository and make that GitHub repository a remote repository for my assignment, and you can make it the origin remote repository. You know, the way when we associate a remote repository with your local repository, then you have to give the repository a name. Origin is one name. GitLab was another remote repository name that we used in the lab this week. So I'm just telling you to create a GitHub repository and link that GitHub repository with the submission that you're making for me, where the GitHub repository's name will be origin. So that will mean that for me, the project that you will submit will have two remote repositories, a GitHub one and a GitLab one. Let's see what else. The other thing you should do, so at risk now of overdoing this, but so your starting point, as I said, is whatever you submitted for me this week in the GitLab lab. That's your starting point. Now, in that project that you submitted to me this week, there are lots of Cypress tests, of course, which are the Cypress tests that we wrote in the previous lab. I'm asking you to remove all of those Cypress tests, just the cy.js files. Get rid of all of those. And then any tests that you are going to be writing, clearly you're going to be putting them into cy.js files in the E2E folder. So the E2E folder should not have any of the testing code that I have already given you from earlier labs. So that's the point I'm getting at there. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, I suppose. I can open the floor to you if you've got any immediate questions. If not, then, you know, you should try and either put questions to me on Slack, but maybe put them into the general channel rather than the direct messages channel, unless it's something that you don't want to put into the general channel, I guess. But if it's a general kind of question, then it's best that you put it into the general channel so that the response can be seen by everybody.